I think, as I explained to you, what we're going to do here is we'll have a conversation, and then portions of it will be used over the course of the next couple of newscasts, and then holistically we'll put it up on YouTube as part of our prison reform series, and I'll share that link with you as well. So, yeah, Jeff Grant, your life has, and I don't mean to minimize it, but for the purposes of this conversation, your life has two acts. Talk to us about that first act, which ultimately led to the second act, which is your position, your standing in the community as someone who is helping people re-enter society after serving their time. But rewind to that first act. Talk to us about how you ended up where you are now.
I was a successful attorney in Westchester County, and in 1992, I ruptured my Achilles tendon in a sports accident, and from there, I became addicted to prescription opioids. So I was really an early person who was a victim of the opioid epidemic. I had doctors who were all too willing to prescribe to me opioids, even though I was in no need for them physically. And little by little, it deteriorated my judgment. I stopped showing up at work. I was unable to be the kind of person, citizen, father, husband that I wanted to be. And then ultimately the day came when my business was collapsing, and in order to save it, I started to make compromises, such as I commingled funds and raided my client's escrow account. I also took out a loan from a Small Business Administration post 9/11, and made fraudulent representations on that application, stating I had an office in downtown Manhattan. Ultimately, what it led to was my disbarment. I resigned my law license in 2002, and on the same day, I tried to commit suicide, and that was the end of my first life.
So, and again, there's so many twists and turns where one opportunity that doesn't happen the right way, and people don't have that second act. And we want to talk to you today here on WPKN News about reforming the prison system in the state of Connecticut and finding more opportunities for people to have that second act. Jeff Grant, talk to us about your second act, and then we'll talk about some of the vision that you have, some of the ideas that you have for rehabilitating and changing, making better the reentry and parole system in this state. But so bring us back. Now, what year is this?
I was released from prison in 2007, and like everyone who is sentenced for a felony in this country, it's a life sentence, whether you understand that or not. And I came back to limited options and limited choices. I first went to a halfway house in Hartford, Connecticut, and then I was on home detention and served 3 years of federal probation. While I was on probation, I had two fantastic opportunities. The first was to volunteer, and I ultimately volunteered at Family Reentry after a few other volunteer assignments. And at Family Reentry, which is a nonprofit headquartered in Bridgeport, they soon after I started volunteering there, they asked me to join their board of directors. And I was the only person on the board of directors who had been formerly incarcerated. And I served on their board of directors for 7 years until 2016, where they appointed me as their executive director. So I ran Family Reentry as their executive director for about 2.5 years. And since then, I've moved on to pursue some ministerial callings, including being a minister for white-collar criminals and their families. The second big decision I made, an opportunity, was that I had found faith or a recommitment to faith or a different understanding of faith while I was in prison. And I went to explore that, and I applied to Union Theological Seminary, which is the preeminent urban seminary in the country, up in Morningside Heights on the Columbia campus. And they accepted me with my background as a white-collar criminal. They accepted me. And so I went there for 3 years and earned a Master of Divinity and became a minister. And I served in a church in the hood in inner city Bridgeport. And then we founded our ministry for white-collar criminals and their families. But I found myself through faith and through a different way. You'd be amazed, John, actually, how the skill set of between being a lawyer and being a minister, the skill set's pretty much the same. It's devoted to helping people and devoted to helping people through sometimes complex problems and listening to their concerns and helping them find a way out. But the motivation is very, very different. When I was a lawyer, I became increasingly more material, and it became about the money. And I think that's what a lot of lawyers find is their big problem with the law, that the reasons they went to law school to begin with are kind of corrupted by the system. For me, it ultimately led to this unavailability to be able to be a whole person, which, of course, wound up leading to drug abuse. Although I was doing prescription narcotics, certainly there were a lot of other things that were tempting for me, and I was also drinking a lot of alcohol. I hope that answers the question.
It does, and I'll tell you what I'd like to have. Obviously, you're on the phone, and our listeners may have heard you a while back on one of our other syndicated programs, so they could be familiar with your story, but the part of the story that I want to focus more on next time we get together, and I'd like to have you in studio, not just on the phone, but in studio, is that faith. I mean, how big of a role does faith and religion play? And I also think about this question. You don't have to answer this. I don't want you to answer this time. We're going to answer this next time. But think of that one person who made the difference for you that could have, you know what I'm saying? There had to be one person initially. I'm sure ultimately it was a bunch of people, but initially there had to be one person. So think who, but we'll talk about that next time we get together. This time, for the purposes of the WPKN newscast, Jeff Grant, we have been talking about rehabilitation and reform of the prison system in the state of Connecticut. The commissioner, the corrections commissioner, has had a lot to say about this. He said that when he first started doing this, his job was just to basically warehouse prisoners. Now they realize that there is a real opportunity to not only rehabilitate, but send these people back into society, better people than before they came in. And some of the items that we've discussed are maybe making the parole system less cumbersome, making it more realistic as far as the expectations of folks who've been released. But you have an interesting angle, and that is that for white-collar criminals, parole is a different experience. Talk to us about some of the challenges that white-collar criminals face and what the public perception is of them.
Well, like any subset of a movement, and here we're talking about the criminal justice movement, there are various groups that are drawn together because they have a common understanding or a common problem. And here, white people who've been incarcerated for white-collar crimes have different things that bring them together. For example, there is no compassion, no empathy. People who live in communities that don't have understandings or embodied experience with the criminal justice system. There are no services, and it's not geographically centered. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of our cities, especially in Connecticut, have poverty issues and racial justice issues and issues that have to be addressed. But other than some financial centers around the country, and in the Fairfield County area is, a very affluent area that certainly has its share of white-collar crime, but mostly it's non-geographic. So you don't have the ability to pull services together in a specific area. So we've had to reach out, and we've had to use technology as a basis of all coming together. So, for example, what we have is a white-collar support group that meets online on Monday nights, and we've had 177 meetings thus far of that group, which is an incredible amount of meetings. It's over 3.5 years worth of meetings, and in the criminal justice sector, most organizations who form or groups who form, they don't make it past their third meeting. They can't find the unanimity of purpose. They're undermanaged or they're underfunded. For us, what we needed to do was we needed to reach out and find people who are living in isolation and offer them the opportunity to come live in community.
And your website, I'm sorry, but your website said that this is the first of its kind.
It is the first of its kind. That reaching out to people who are living in isolation in all these disparate areas around the country is an amazing step forward and could not have been done without technology. We meet on Zoom, so on Monday nights it kind of looks like the Brady Bunch with people in boxes, and we've had 20 people on at a time who've never met each other in person, but they meet each other online, and this is the first time in years they've gotten to talk to other people about their problems and their concerns and how difficult it is in their lives and what to do for resources and what do you do about work and what do you do about faith and what do you do about family. So it's really the calling of my life to be able to bring to people who are underserved, underrepresented and misunderstood, to bring light and love to them because it's not offered anywhere else.
How much harder would your rehabilitation been? Well, I guess you didn't have this, though. So at what point then did you say that something like this was necessary? I mean, my question initially was going to be how much harder would your rehabilitation have been if you didn't have it, but you did not have anything like this, correct?
I did not.
So, at what point did this brainchild come to you?
About 4 years ago or so. I mean, most of what I've learned, even as a minister, what I've learned about myself has been through talking with other men and women who've been through these issues. And so, for example, I would talk to them and they would talk to me about the pain and the suffering and the wreckage they've caused their families. And that made me look at myself in a different way. Say, wait, what kind of pain have I caused my family? And through working with other people, I was able to understand myself better and what my issues are and how to solve my own problem. So the concept of service has really been about not so much serving other people, but it has, with kind of radical generosity, opened up my story to them to hopefully give them the courage and the power and the agency to become their authentic selves and to open up to their story. So I was able to see what services weren't available for me and my family when I came home or when I was going through these issues 17 or 18 years ago. And then I got to see what can we add to their lives that wasn't available for me. And certainly one of them was the ability to live in community and to have a network of people who could help one another. Without technology, we could not have done that.
So I guess another thought here is you talk about public perception. I think the public perception probably is that white-collar criminals go to resort penitentiaries. So this is not a reality. You're here to say that these people do their time like anyone else.
Everybody does their time. It's not pleasant being in prison. Personally, I did not serve in a camp, like what people call the Club Fed. I actually served time in a minimum security prison with bars and controlled movement. And I was one of very few people who had committed white-collar crimes on that compound. But even in a camp where, frankly, most white-collar criminals go, even in the camp, not a pleasant experience. And they're deprived of their ability to work. They're deprived of the ability to move their lives forward. They're bankrupt or they're insolvent. Probably they've had to spend exorbitant amounts of money on attorneys. Their marriages break up. They're estranged from their children. They're estranged from their community. It's a horrible, horrible experience. And to think that anybody would think that people who are incarcerated for white-collar crimes have it easy is just a misnomer. It's not accurate. And certainly when they come back into society, the world is not opening its arms for people who have been incarcerated for white-collar crimes. The jobs aren't there. The social opportunities aren't there. It's gotten better. It certainly has gotten better the last few years. But I wonder whether or not very low unemployment, 3.7% unemployment, has actually opened up avenues for all formerly incarcerated people that wouldn't otherwise be there. And I think this is a huge opportunity to move forward social movements like hiring people who've been in prison before perhaps the pendulum swings the other way and our unemployment rates start to increase again, and people will not take a chance on hiring people who've been in prison.
That's a very interesting thought. So basically, a good economy lends itself to increased opportunity for everyone, including people who are re-entering society.
Well, a rising tide lifts all boats. And here we are with people when they've been prosecuted for white-collar crimes and they're deprived of their ability to use their degrees and their work experience, because these are incredibly talented, well-read, well-educated people, but their capacity is so underutilized. We have people who are driving trucks who were formerly corporate attorneys. And as a society, how does that advance us? How does that help us? And they're certainly not unable to make any great strides in paying restitution, or from a social justice standpoint, how do we justify keeping people out of the economic workforce so that they can't support their families? And the answer is it makes no sense. Now, a lot of these arguments I can make for anybody who went to prison, and certainly in some capacities of my life I do. But since we're talking about people who've been in prison for white-collar crimes, something I know a lot about, and certainly the ability to reach out for help has been greatly hindered until now, when we've brought these valuable services at prisonist.org, where we've brought these services to people who are suffering from these issues.
We'll give that website address again before we let you go. And as I said, I invite you back in studio very soon to talk more on a deeper level. We're broadcasting this evening, and we've been covering this on WPKN in Bridgeport. Bridgeport is a city where the mayor is an ex-convict. You talked about not denying opportunities to people re-entering society after serving their time, but what are your thoughts on something like, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's an election year. There's an election in a week. What are your thoughts on someone like Joe Ganim, who's rejoined, picked up right where he left off? Are there instances, Reverend Grant, where maybe more scrutiny is needed than others? I mean, this is not the guy you talked about driving the truck. This is someone who's returning to the same position where the infraction was committed.
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm apolitical. So if I'm talking about Mayor Ganim, I'm not talking about him as a candidate. I'm talking about him as
yes, this is a case. This is a case study. Yeah. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it is a very real adult conversation that should be had.
Yeah. Well, I know Mayor Ganim, and I served on his as the co-chair of the mayor's initiative for reentry affairs. So I just want to put that out there to make sure that everyone understands that I'm speaking with some degree of authority here. Nobody who goes to prison comes back and restarts where they started with. This is a life-altering experience, and I know that Joe Ganim was significantly changed by this. And whether or not he went back into politics or he tried to get his oil license back, or whether or not he was driving a truck, he's not the same guy that he went in as. And I have a huge amount of respect for anybody who tries to knock down barriers and make something of themselves and be productive in their life after prison. But to actually take the kind of risks that he took, because talk about fear of rejection. I mean, I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get people to respond to my resumes. This guy put himself out there for the public to either elect him or to laugh him off the stage. And the fact that he got elected and he's able to hold his head high is amazing to me. It's amazing because not enough people go to prison and come back and think that they have the ability or the place or the dignity to be able to do the kind of things that Joe Ganim has done. So I have to applaud that. Do I think that it's difficult to be in a city like Bridgeport, where there's a very high crime rate relatively, and there's the public scrutiny is there for all kinds of things, elected officials and police and police commissioners and all of that. It's very difficult. It's very complicated. You know that Bridgeport has had a very lengthy history of all kinds of dysfunction. So to undo that and march it forward, I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to do that. It's not something I know how to do. But for people who do, and to be willing to put their criminal record right in the forefront and say, listen, this is who I am, and I'm not embarrassed by it, and I want to tell you what I've learned in the process. I think everyone coming home from prison should do that.
I figured that you would have an insightful take on it, and I mean we've certainly discussed it enough. It's come up in the debates, and I think Bridgeport is a unique place. I think if you're looking for a second chance, this is definitely a place that you want to take a crack at it. Reverend Grant, before I let you go, on any last thoughts specifically on reforming the parole and the reentry system, the entire operation in the state of Connecticut? Anything you'd like to add on that topic?
Yeah, I want to say that we've had the opportunity to have our Department of Corrections led by two great reformers in a row, Scott Semple and Roland Cook. And I think that the leadership in our corrections department has suffered because of lack of funding. So you can have all the great ideas in the world as a founder, as a leader of any organization. But if you can't fund it properly, then you wind up into a very large extent, you wind up to be frustrated. I don't know that they are frustrated, but I can imagine that it's incredibly frustrating to have all these positive ideas, including about parole and probation and how to best serve people while they're in prison, and then be somehow unable to do what you know that you need to do because of legacy problems in the state that channel our money and our tax money into other places. In Connecticut's case, mostly debt or as you know, pension obligations. So this is not for me to be political. This is me to say that 10 years ago, we had a fantastic start. We were ahead of the curve, very, very progressive. That DNA is still in us. But it's up to people and the legislators and for individuals to actually stand up and say, wait a second, where we want to use our tax dollars is in long-term answers, long-term solutions, and not short-term budgetary solutions, so that our state is going to be great 10 years from now and 20 years from now. And the way to do that is to lift up the least of these, the people who are most suffering and the people who are denied the greatest opportunities. So that's kind of a philosophical answer to a problem that's endemic as to why there aren't opportunities to people when they come out of prison to get appropriate services, housing, employment. And part of the answer is because there aren't sufficient opportunities before they went to prison.
Yeah.
We've created these communities that where they don't have a first chance. So how can we even be giving them a second chance? I mean, what we really need is a first chance society, and everybody knows that. The problem is there the political will to make change?
You know, you said that it's a frustrating thing, obviously, to not be able to act upon great ideas that folks have for reform, but maybe even worse, Jeff Grant, is having to cut things that are proven to be working. We talked to some folks last week who were part of a mentoring program for juvenile offenders, and that program is now self-funded. So that had been cut 4 years ago. So maybe that's even worse, I think.
Yeah. I mean, in 2016, December 2016, the Department of Corrections canceled the contracts and cut the budget out of every non-residential reentry program in the state, which meant that there was no more, and still is no more, state-funded prisoner reentry services other than residential. So all nonprofits have been left to their own devices to try to figure out what to do. Now, I know that you had John Mealy, and I think you had John Mealy and Diane McKnight on the call.
I did.
And these people are not only gifted in their willingness and ability to work with people in these difficult circumstances, but they've had to become fundraisers. And that's not a natural thing for people who've been in programs for the decades that these gentlemen have been, to have to go out there and raise money. But what other choice do they have? Because they're so passionate about what they do. So, you know, kudos to John Mealy and Diane McKnight from Family Reentry, and they're out there on the firing lines, and they're also out there trying to raise money for these problems that frankly should be funded by the state. And again, there's no blame here. OPM has done a great job. The Department of Corrections has done a great job. Judicial has done a great job. Doing it with no money is impossible.
Listen, you gave us more material than I had hoped, and I am definitely looking forward to having you back in studio for part 2. We'll give out that address, prisonist.org.
Yes, and my name is Jeff Grant, or Reverend Jeff Grant, and you can reach me through the website at prisonist.org, and it's Progressive Prison Ministries, and we are a 501c3, so we do accept donations, and we are happy to be of service to anybody who calls us. We answer all inquiries, and we make sure we find resources for anyone who contacts us.
We'll talk again very soon, Reverend Grant.